the second full day, the evening of the second full day of our spring Sesshin 2021. I'd like to begin my Dharma talk by reading the koan that we're exploring. And it is Nanyue's It's Not Like Something. The main case. Zen Master Huairong of Nanyue went to study with the sixth ancestor, Huineng. The sixth ancestor said, "Where are you from?" Nanyue said, "I come from national teacher Huiyan of Songshan." Sixth ancestor said, "What is it that has come like this?" Nanyue could not answer. He attended on the master for 8 years and worked on the question. One day he said to the sixth ancestor, "Now I understand it. When I first came to study with you, you asked me, what is it that has come like this?" The sixth ancestor said, "How do you understand it?" Nanyue said, "To say it is like something misses it." The sixth ancestor said, "Does it depend upon practice and enlightenment?" Nanyue said, "It's not that there is no practice and enlightenment. It's just that they cannot be defiled." The sixth ancestor said, "Just this non-defilement is what Buddhas have maintained and transmitted. You are like this. I am like this. Ancestors in India were like this." And then Daido Lori's commentary: "To set up monasteries and establish the teachings is like adding flowers to brocade. The wisdom that has no teacher pervades the whole universe, reaching everywhere. When it is truly seen, you go deaf, dumb, and blind. What is there to compare this to? How can it be expressed? Indeed, how can it be understood? Take off the blinders, set down the backpack. This is the peaceful dwelling. This is why it is said the 10,000 sages have not transmitted a single particle of the truth. Yet students throughout the world labor over appearances and grasp at reflections. Tell me, since it is not transmitted, then why are there so many complicated koans and teachings?" And then the capping verse: "Blue sky, bright sun, there is no distinguishing east from west. Yet acting in accord with the imperative still requires dispensing medicine when the sickness appears." Every time I read that, I see things there that I hadn't tuned into before. And just in this reading, I saw a few things that I hadn't really seen in this koan before. It's hopefully now you will all enjoy continuing to look into the koan as you go forward after Sesshin. There's so much here. Well, by the end of the second day of Sesshin, everybody's rather settled. Everybody has been very earnestly practicing. We've settled down and focused in on immediate, intimate, true, direct experience, some of which we don't like. Some of it hurts: pain in the back, pain in the shoulders, pain in the neck. This whole practice can be a pain in the neck in a certain state of mind. Our experience of pain or restlessness or boredom or hopelessness may have come up in our inmost experience. I like to call this our inmost experience, which is ironically also our outmost experience. In or out, there's no separation. It is the only experience that we have at any moment. Only intimacy. Or in a different state of mind, estrangement, intimacy or estrangement. These are the planes that we engage. So arriving at Sesshin with the intention to clear out all the dust and cobwebs and beer cans and resentments and volumes of books and all our educational degrees and jobs and relationships and disappointments and doubts and dark moods, clearing all this out from our backpacks with the intention to restore our original clarity and lightness of being. That's what we come with. But then comes the second day. We may encounter instead whatever contents are stored in the backpack in spades. The body can hurt, the heart can ache, and the mind can get so busy trying to convince you that this is all hopeless or absurd. The mind can get really obsessive, insistent, and almost like a bully. On this second day, a lot often is like this. But the recommendation from long practice is just to hold steady. Holding steady, coming back again and again to the very simple instructions. Follow the breath, listen to sound, and practice 3 breath zazen. When the mind is so busy, sometimes all we can do is just commit 3 breaths. I'm going to stay with the breath. And then come back to that again and begin it again as often as you can. Come back as often as necessary when the mind has gotten caught. And simply start over. This is the practice. This is so useful to practice with. It's really applicable in all kinds of ways in our life. Holding steady, being able to hold steady, to know that we can just hold steady. Because we're all, it says Sesshin, we're all exercising our wisdom muscle. And it takes time for this muscle to remember how it works. Unfortunately, there's no instant pill. Generations have looked for the instant pill. I mean, thousands of years of generations have looked for this pill. And always it seems to come back to steady practice. One definition that's been offered of Zazen is sitting long and getting tired. How can such a practice bring about such major transformation over time? There are moments of clarity that show us actually the great way, that reveal the great way and give us a taste of peaceful dwelling. That is our essential nature. There are moments. May we all be able to rest in peaceful dwelling and persist until we've had a taste. The one taste of Zen is all it takes. One taste, a sip of Zen, a sip. Master Nanyue, who's showing us the way in this koan, knew the same struggles as you and I. He was an experienced practitioner. He had many long years of practice, and yet, so as Seido so beautifully laid out in her talk last night, Master Nanyue was still dissatisfied with his understanding. So he goes to study with Huineng. And one little detail here about Nanyue, in the koan, he's called Master Nanyue. He's already pulled and turned in the practice of the Zen way for many years. Like many of us here have been pulled and turned for years. If we were to add up the number of years of practice we all have together, it would come to many, many hundreds of years. And yet, he's still not free of defilement. In other words, he's still uneasy. He knows he isn't quite through. That word defilement, it's a word we don't use much these days, but it really packs a punch. In a practice with defilement, it's a punch to our vitality. When we still get caught up in our fabrications, our narratives, our confabulations, and all our habits of picking and choosing and assuming and expecting. Nanyue is practiced enough to recognize that when Huineng asks him, "Where are you from?" he's not asking where he was born or for his cultural credentials, time, place, accomplishments, titles, etc. This can be a concern that we bring for ourselves to practice. Oh, I'm not young enough. I'm not old enough. I don't have enough energy. I'm not smart enough. I'm not simple enough. Nanyue sees that Huineng is right away putting his finger on, Nanyue sees that Huineng is putting his finger right on what brings Nanyue to him. And then Huineng goes on to refine the question that will guide Nanyue to true north, so to speak, to full awakening. This is always the process, as Seido pointed out, and it's so valuable. I want to just reiterate this a bit. This is the process that all of us engage in the course of our study. We bring to our teachers and also to our lives in general, we bring our clarity, but we also bring our confusion. Clarifying the confusion consists of taking on the real question of the moment, which requires us to get at what it is. And sometimes all we get at is what is blocking our ability to directly open to our current circumstances so that we can know our completeness. What gets in the way of knowing that we are whole and complete? This life is whole and complete. And then to be able to respond to whatever is coming up in our life, just as it is, in a lively, creative, and beneficial way, a way that brings benefit to ourselves, to others, to the situation. So the questions that Seido outlined that in Huineng's question to Nanyue, and that Nanyue lives into them for 8 years. The question was, what is it that thus comes? So what's in that question? Well, who are you? What gets left out of how you express your life? What keeps you from feeling that you are actually being all that you know you are? What frustrates you that you can't quite get at who you know you most essentially are and show up in the world fully in that? And then what do you believe about awakening? We have a lot of ideas about what that term is, what's meant by enlightenment. You know, the word enlightenment can be pretty off-putting because it's such a big deal. And it can raise even more doubt about our ability to get settled, to be peaceful, to feel satisfied, and to feel whole, and to really get what other human beings have gotten and have gloried in. And then another one of the questions is, what do you think your obstacle is? your own unique, specific obstacle that grows out of your own experience so far in your life. There are the classic obstacles of greed, anger, ignorance. How does that take shape in your own life, in your own body? And then this question of have you yet encountered your true nature in a way that is so unmistakable that you don't have any doubt? The way Chosen described this to me once when I said to her, well, I think I'm awake. And she said, well, that's like saying, I think I had a baby. When you really have an experience, you know you've had an experience. And one of those little tastes of profound peace and profound sense of, oh, yes, I remember, no matter how brief and flickering it is in the course of our practice, it's so genuine. And it goes so thoroughly to the very source. We read a lot of stories about people awakening and getting, like jumping up and doing all these big expressive moments, but it's not necessarily the way that happens for you or for me. We can't know. And then the other one is, where have you already looked? Where are you looking and where are you not looking? And of course, the answer always comes back to, well, I'm not even looking directly into my own experience. I'm still following other people around and listening to other people's words, which is where we begin, and sometimes very helpful. And eventually we all come back to really believing the instruction. Follow your very own breath. Follow your very own experience in your very own body. So these are foundational questions that all the koans pose in various ways, because they are encounters between students and teachers through the ages. So this phrase, what is it that has come like this? Huineng asks. This is an interesting way to express the question. The question that actually is, where are you coming from? He points directly to what Nanyue is really asking. Where does your life emanate from? What do you live from? What do you live for? Where does it come out of you in your ordinary moments and days of your activities and all your occupations and relationships? Now that's a wonderful question and resonates throughout any life. Nanyue's life, my life, your life. Where am I coming from? Where are you coming from? What are you all about? Does being who you truly are depend on practice? Does it depend on enlightenment? These are really key questions. Being familiar a bit now with the details of Huineng's life, we know that he came from poverty, even and so poor he couldn't even read or write. And he had to work when he was a kid, cutting and selling firewood to support his mother and himself. Imagine what it was like in the year 648 in China. I mean, in the year 648, right here where you sit, it was deep woods or fields, forest. Maybe no human had tread here or sat here before. 648 in China, cutting firewood to support his mother. Rough and grinding poverty, which is one kind of practice, that's for sure. Suffering indeed, a constancy imposed by harsh circumstances the constancy of the reality of not enough. This very constancy that Shunryu Suzuki is talking about in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, when he says Zen is not some kind of excitement, but is the practice of constancy. That was, when I came across that phrase the first time, I felt so relieved. Zen is not some kind of excitement, it's the practice of constancy. That's something immediate that we can all get with. It's the constancy, steadiness, holding steady of meeting what we must meet, what we cannot hide from, how we must attune to what is right here and now. We must. There's no choice. Whatever is real and absolute in its functioning at the moment is the reality that we are asked to attune to. To the extent that we refuse, we really struggle. And perhaps in an odd way, these very difficult circumstances can, in the long run, if you have the mind of the way, help us. Maybe. Don't know. Such a condition of poverty might break some into lasting despair, into collapse, into addiction. We see that a lot these days. This widespread addiction, addictive behavior, is a disease of despair. But for others, and this is true in Huineng's case, this kind of circumstance was an advantage because it instilled in him the need to be really awake to what was actual, to be always paying attention to what was going on, left him knowing his own experience, deeply knowing, not to wait for practice outside of enlightenment. But life itself is the way, not something separate from ordinary happenstance. So when he heard the person reciting that line from the Diamond Sutra, abiding nowhere, awakened mind arises. When he heard that, he was ripe. He was ripened already by a long, difficult life. And he recognized this truth at once as his own experience. The nature of all things is open and unimpeded. In the unimpeded Dharma, which is whatever actually happens, no thing interferes with anything else. This is open. This is what open refers to. And this is the condition of Huineng's heart mind, even while material conditions were extremely difficult for him. He had a karmic affiliation with enlightenment due to uncreated blessings. That's his phrase. That's Huineng's phrase, uncreated blessings, due to uncreated blessings. So in his commentary on the Diamond Sutra, he talks about uncreated blessings. He says, some need truth being pointed out by a guide, but truth is, by its nature, not an object of attainment, not something we get from somewhere else, not a thing. Truth is not a thing independent of us. He says, just realize the purity of your own nature, the original freedom from mundane toils, so you experience directly. It is calm and natural. And then you spontaneously realize Buddha nature. He says spontaneously. There's nothing you have to do because there's no separation, ever. So Huineng calls whatever we are confronted with, whatever makes it necessary for us to awaken, uncreated blessings. Whatever makes it necessary for us to awaken. So that can be two kinds of necessities. One is profound difficulty and hurt. And the other is so profoundly blessed that you come across the question of, well, is this all there is? So you can come from a couple of different ways, one from profound suffering and one from profound excess. Seeing the emptiness in profound excess. And we inherit these blessings unbeknownst to us. Some of us need truth to be pointed out by a guide, he says. That's true. In the form of a Zen teacher or a Sangha friend or a Dharma text. Or else we encountered it directly, as Daido Lori points out, in the wisdom that has no teacher and pervades the whole universe. And we just notice the circumstances of our life. Some only have circumstances to awaken them. They don't come across other influences, the circumstances, just like Huineng. And some meet the Dharma teachings directly. How blessed Huineng was with just the right difficult conditions. And some of you know the story of how I came to practice. Speaking of difficult conditions, well, one of them was that I had asthma starting when I was about 2 years old. And so I spent many of my young years paying attention, getting each breath. So when, after a lot of years of difficulties about other things too, I finally came to Zen, it was like, oh, yes, I remember this. And it's one thing that protected me my whole life, the fact that there was a kind of wisdom that I got even as a 2-year-old that helped me be present in a way that was very protective of me as I grew up. So calling whatever we are confronted with that urges us to awaken and puts the fire in our belly, he called uncreated blessings. So what are yours? That's a question that stimulates a way-seeking mind talk, isn't it? To look into what brought me here to this practice. Getting back to this wonderful phrase that Shodo Harada Roshi uses about Huineng, he says, a karmic affiliation with enlightenment. It's a great phrase, a karmic affiliation with enlightenment. In other words, an affinity with awakening. We are drawn to it. All of us here at Sesshin share this affinity. Every one of you has an affinity with awakening, a karmic affiliation with enlightenment. So we can think about that when we raise the word karma, the idea of karma, where we come from. I think of, on the one hand, there's a family that comes to my mind that I've known that demonstrates this karmic affinity or lack of. And in this family, they went through hell when the children were younger. And as adults, one died from an overdose, one ended up in prison, one lived for years in the old parents' basement, and one ended up at a Zen center as an adult and thrived. So karmic affinity runs deep and it runs individual. How about the karmic affiliation with enlightenment of the ancient Chinese ancestor Layman Pang and his daughter Ling Xiao, who were both deeply awakened lay practitioners. And there were two people in that family also that we don't hear about much, the wife and also the son, who did not share this Zen affinity and ended up having very different lives, according to legend. This was a really long time ago. The different karmic affiliations grow out of similar circumstances. So the circumstances are there, but there are other unseen influences. And we slowly uncover more about our lives when we practice. Seido quoted Shugen Roshi saying, when we are motivated to find out what we are in the midst of, and that's true for all of us. What is this? What is this life that I have come to? How did I get here? There's so many influences that go beyond our knowing and beyond our immediate actions. So many deep habits of mind and body lying outside of our awareness, in addition to all those we are aware of. This continual process of alignment that we're engaged in includes all of it, and reveals more and more of it as we go. Just as another thing that Seido pointed out in that wonderful talk last night was Nanyue didn't finally clarify his question himself. This is really, really key, very significant. All of his life clarified his question. It was a natural outcome of living into his life as it was. And all of our own questions and challenges, we live into them. This is why we turn directly toward whatever comes up. And we are willing to experience it. We're willing to come under the influence of what is true. Just realize the purity of your own nature, says Huineng, realizing original freedom from mundane toils, original freedom, calm and natural, and you will spontaneously realize your Buddha nature. Original freedom, we are originally free. So this is a return to our original freedom. Found nowhere else but right where we find all of our chains and resistances and sorrows and difficulties. Then Huineng asks him, does it depend on practice and enlightenment? And Nanyue is at last able to say, it's not that there is no practice and enlightenment, but that it cannot be defiled. It cannot be divided, practice from enlightenment. It cannot be separated. We can't demand it. It cannot be prescribed. It cannot be described. And if the word enlightenment bothers you, as it always did me, then perhaps awakening is closer to the mark. Awakening is ordinary, transformative, and specific. We see into the nature of an experience and exclaim, oh, I see. So we're instructed not to get caught in any of these words that are attempting, good intention in attempting to point the way to us. But practicing without demands and expectations. Another way that this is expressed is practicing with no gaining idea. If there is originally nothing missing, then what is there to be gained? What is there to be understood? There's a really wonderful exchange in the Diamond Sutra. When Buddha asked Subhuti, "What do you think, Subhuti? When the realized one was with Dipankara Buddha in the past, did he gain anything in the way of truth?" Now, Dipankara Buddha was one of the Buddhas before Shakyamuni Buddha, who Shakyamuni Buddha came to when he was still a bodhisattva, before his incarnation as Buddha. Is there anything in the way of truth? What do you think, Subhuti? When the realized one was with Dipankara Buddha in the past, did he gain anything in the way of truth? No, world honored one. The realized one really did not gain anything in the way of truth from Dipankara Buddha. That's very important. In this spirit, we say, Zazen is good for nothing. It can derail us from some mistaken notion about what's going on here. Zazen is good for nothing, and yet, we practice. Not with the expectation that if we plant a radish, we'll get a radish, but with the open awareness that we are pulled and turned, accepted and used in the practice of enlightenment. It's bigger than me or you. It's bigger. But we do need to make ourselves available and be willing to be pulled and turned. We don't know what's going on. It lies beyond knowing, outside of words and letters. Or as it's phrased in the Bendoa, it's exactly attaining undivided original enlightenment in the ground of non-fabrication. Not making anything up, even when we don't know what's going on. Not making something out of no thing. Not falling for our big and little stories, but paying attention wholeheartedly to this brief, mysterious life that we all share.